There is a code older than steel, forged not in the fire of the forge, but in the unseen fire of the human spirit. It was never meant for display, never designed to impress crowds or earn applause. This code was tested in silence, in moments when no one was watching, in choices made without witnesses or reward. It was tested not only in battle, but in every breath a warrior took, every decision made under pressure, every instant where fear, comfort, and ego demanded surrender. This code is Bushido, the way of the warrior. Not a list of rules written on paper, not a manual for combat techniques, but a living discipline built on 8 sacred virtues. 8 pillars so demanding that most men admire them, but few ever fully embody them. Rectitude, courage, compassion, respect, honesty, honor, loyalty, and self-control. These are not qualities you simply learn or imitate. They are qualities you become through hardship, through failure, through the relentless daily choice to stand upright when everything inside you urges collapse. In feudal Japan, during the age of the samurai, these virtues were not philosophy or decoration. They were survival. They were the line between a warrior and a wanderer, between a man who could be broken by circumstance and one who remained unshaken no matter the storm. To live without them was to exist hollow, regardless of how sharp your blade or flawless your technique. This is the story of Dai, a young samurai born into legacy and privilege, who inherited his father's sword but not his father's spirit. Dai possessed every external advantage a warrior could desire, yet discovered he lacked the one thing that mattered most, an unbreakable foundation of character. He stood victorious in the training yard, undefeated, praised by peers, admired by elders, yet empty inside. Each victory felt hollow, each compliment rang false, because skill alone could not fill the void where honor should have lived. Dai would soon learn that Bushido does not negotiate, does not bend to comfort, and does not compromise with weakness. It demands complete embodiment. Through 8 merciless trials, each designed to strip away illusion, ego, and convenience, Dai would either be forged into something unbreakable or exposed as fragile beneath his polished exterior. This was not a journey toward greater strength in combat, but a descent into the deepest parts of the self, where weakness hides and excuses are born. Bushido offered no guarantees of survival, success, or recognition. It offered only one promise: if lived fully, it would eliminate weakness forever by replacing it with something far rarer and far more dangerous to chaos: character. This is not merely a story of the past. It is a mirror held up to every man who senses that comfort has made him soft, that skill without discipline has left him empty, and that modern life has offered ease at the cost of meaning. The forbidden Bushido method was never about becoming feared. It was about becoming impossible to break. The following morning arrived without ceremony, yet Dai felt the weight of it before the sun even touched the tiled roofs of the estate. He woke earlier than usual, his mind restless, his chest tight with a feeling he could not name. Training had always been simple for him: wake, practice, win, repeat, but today felt different, as if something unseen was already testing him. When he entered the courtyard, the air was still, the gravel undisturbed, and at its center stood a lone figure. The man was older than Dai expected, his posture relaxed but unbroken, like a blade resting in its sheath. His clothes were plain, worn by travel, yet every fold was deliberate, every movement precise. This was not a man who relied on appearances. This was Kenshin. Kenshin did not bow deeply, nor did he offer praise. He simply looked at Dai, and in that gaze Dai felt exposed in a way no duel had ever achieved. "You are skilled," Kenshin said calmly, "but skill is the cheapest currency a warrior can possess." The word struck harder than any wooden sword. Dai bristled, ready to defend himself, but Kenshin raised a hand, silencing him. "I watched you yesterday. You won because your opponents feared losing. You did not win because you understood yourself." Dai felt anger rise, then confusion. He had trained his entire life for mastery of the sword, believing that perfection of form was the same as strength of character. Kenshin's presence challenged that belief without drawing a blade. Kenshin reached into his sleeve and placed a small pouch on the stones between them. It landed softly, yet its weight felt immense. "Inside is gold," he said. "Enough to live comfortably for years. It belongs to a merchant who wronged your clan." Dai knelt and touched the pouch, feeling its heft. Revenge, justice, restoration, these were familiar concepts. His uncle had spoken of honor often, of settling debts and correcting insults. Taking the gold felt logical, even righteous. But then Kenshin spoke again, revealing the truth that transformed a simple decision into a crucible. The merchant's crime had not been malice, but error. A miscalculation. An honest mistake. Taking the gold would destroy a family that had already suffered enough. For the first time, Dai felt fear without danger. Not fear of death, but fear of choice. Every victory he had earned until now came with rules, boundaries, and applause. This choice came with none of that. No witnesses. No praise. Only consequence. His uncle expected obedience. His clan expected restitution. Yet the innocent merchant would pay the price. Dai's hand hovered, trembling, suspended between expectation and conscience. Kenshin said nothing. This was not a lesson taught through words. Dai remembered his father, not the stories others told, but the quiet moments. The way his father spoke less and watched more. The way he chose silence over convenience. Slowly, Dai withdrew his hand. The decision felt like stepping into cold water, shocking, uncomfortable, undeniable. "Return it," he said quietly. "Honor built on injustice is not honor." The word surprised even him. Kenshin nodded once, not in approval, but in recognition. Something had shifted. Not in the world, but in Dai. As Kenshin turned away, he spoke one final sentence. "This was not a test of loyalty to your clan. It was a test of loyalty to yourself." Dai stood alone in the courtyard long after Kenshin left, aware that something irreversible had begun. He had not won anything. There was no victory to celebrate. Yet for the first time, he felt whole for a fleeting moment. The hollow echo inside him softened. The first virtue had awakened, not because he understood it, but because he chose it when no one demanded that he do so. 3 days passed in silence. Kenshin did not speak of the gold again, and Dai did not ask. The absence of explanation was itself a lesson, one that unsettled Dai more than any lecture could have. On the 4th morning, Kenshin told Dai to follow him beyond the training grounds, past the fields and stone paths that marked the safety of the estate. They walked for hours, the land rising beneath their feet until the air thinned and the wind grew sharp. When they stopped, Dai realized they stood at the edge of a cliff, a jagged gorge splitting the earth below them. White water roared far beneath, its violence constant, indifferent, final. "This is where courage lives," Kenshin said, his voice steady against the wind. Dai frowned. He had faced dozens of opponents without hesitation. He had felt adrenaline, excitement, focus, but never this tightness in his chest. Kenshin handed him a coiled rope, old and rough, its fibers frayed from years of use. "Tie this around your waist. Climb down to the ledge below. Retrieve the stone marker you'll find there. Then climb back up." Dai stared at the rope, then at the churning water far below. "Why?" he asked. Kenshin's answer was simple. "Because courage that has never been tested is only confidence wearing armor." Dai's hands shook as he secured the knot. He hated that Kenshin could see it. Every part of him wanted to argue, to claim this was unnecessary, reckless, theatrical. But he recognized the same voice that had once urged him to take the gold for convenience rather than justice. Fear had changed shape, but its message was the same. Kenshin met his gaze. "Fear is honest," he said. "It tells you the risk is real. Cowardice is what happens when fear makes your decisions for you." With that, Kenshin stepped back. Dai moved to the edge. The world narrowed. The wind pressed against him like a living thing. His foot hovered for a long moment before finding the rock. The rope tightened, groaning softly under his weight. Every muscle locked. Every breath became deliberate. He descended inch by inch, the cliff face cold and unforgiving beneath his fingers. Halfway down, doubt screamed louder than the wind. One slip. One failure. That would be the end. Training had never prepared him for this, not truly. There were no rules here, no judges, no second chances. When he reached the ledge, Dai collapsed to one knee, his heart pounding violently. The stone marker rested near the edge, simple and unremarkable. He grasped it, surprised by how ordinary it felt. This small thing was the reason he risked everything. The climb back up was worse. His arms burned. His grip weakened. Then he heard it, a sharp snap, faint but unmistakable. One strand of the rope had frayed through. Panic surged, fast and overwhelming. His body begged him to freeze, to cling, to stop moving. "Keeps moving," Kenshin's voice carried from above, cutting through the chaos. Courage is not waiting for fear to disappear. It is moving while fear screams. Dai forced himself to breathe. He climbed. His hands bled. His vision blurred. Another snap echoed behind him, but he did not look back. He reached the top and collapsed onto the stone, gasping, shaking, alive. Kenshin knelt beside him, expression unreadable. "Now you understand," he said quietly. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is obedience to purpose in spite of it." Dai stared at the sky, his body trembling, his mind strangely calm. He had faced something real and survived, not because he was fearless, but because he chose to move anyway. The second virtue had awakened, not in triumph, but in trembling resolve. The third test did not come with danger or spectacle. It arrived quietly, wrapped in rumor and unease. By the second week of Kenshin's guidance, the village below the estate was restless. Whispers moved faster than truth, carried on anxious voices and lowered gazes. A small group of bandits had been captured stealing rice from the communal granary. The law was clear and merciless. Theft during famine was punishable by death. The execution was scheduled for dawn, public and final. Dai heard the news as he passed through the market, watching fear flicker across familiar faces. These were not hardened criminals. These were men shaped by hunger. That evening, Kenshin led Dai to the holding cells. The smell of damp earth and human desperation filled the narrow space. 3 men sat bound against the wall, thin to the point of frailty. One of them could not have been more than 16, his face hollow, his eyes wide with terror. Kenshin said nothing at first. He let Dai look. Let him feel. Finally, he spoke. "The law demands their execution. Justice, as written, will be satisfied tomorrow." Dai clenched his jaw. "Then why bring me here?" Kenshin's gaze did not soften. "Because law and justice are not always the same. This is the third virtue. Compassion." Dai recoiled internally. Compassion felt dangerous. Weak. He had been trained to cut cleanly, to remove hesitation. Yet here, strength demanded hesitation. Kenshin continued, his voice calm but relentless. "Your father once stood before a samurai condemned to ritual suicide for retreating in battle. Others called it cowardice. Your father learned the man had stayed behind to carry wounded soldiers to safety. Retreat was not fear. It was mercy. He saved a life and lost respect for it. But he did not regret the choice." Kenshin turned toward Dai. "Strength that only punishes is fragile. True strength protects." Dai looked again at the prisoners. At the boy whose hands shook uncontrollably. "What choice do I have?" Dai asked. "I am not the law." Kenshin nodded. "No. But your voice carries weight. Your uncle listens to you. You can speak. Or you can remain silent and let the blade fall. Silence pressed in around them. Dai felt the familiar tension rise, between safety and sacrifice, acceptance and isolation. Speaking would brand him as soft. Weak. A warrior who valued mercy over order. That night, Dai did not sleep. He walked the grounds until his feet ached, wrestling with himself. Compassion demanded risk. It demanded standing alone. At dawn, the villagers gathered, tense and quiet. The prisoners were brought forward. Just as the executioner raised his blade, Dai stepped out from the crowd. His heart hammered, but his voice held. "Lord Tata," he said, bowing deeply, "I ask permission to speak." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. His uncle's eyes narrowed. "Speak." Dai inhaled. "These men broke the law. That is true. But the law does not see the empty fields, the failed harvest, the starving children. Killing them will not restore order. It will only deepen despair. I ask for banishment instead. Let them leave this province alive. Let mercy prove our strength." The silence that followed was heavy, judgmental. Other samurai stared at him with thinly veiled contempt. Weakness. Dishonor. Foolishness. His uncle stood still for a long moment. Then he spoke. "The boy speaks with wisdom earned through hardship. Banishment is granted." The executioner lowered his blade. As the prisoners were led away, the youngest turned back and bowed deeply to Dai, tears streaking his face. No words were needed. Kenshin appeared beside Dai, unseen by the crowd. "Compassion is not softness," he said. "It is strength that does not fear being misunderstood." Dai exhaled, feeling something shift within him. He had chosen protection over punishment, courage over approval. The third virtue awakened quietly, not with cheers or victory, but with the steady weight of responsibility. By the second month, Kenshin no longer announced the lessons. They arrived disguised as ordinary moments, the kind most men overlook. One morning, as mist clung to the training yard, Kenshin entered the dojo with an old peasant at his side. The man's back was bent from years of labor, his hands cracked and stained with soil. He bowed clumsily, clearly out of place among polished armor and disciplined stances. Kenshin spoke simply. "This man wishes to learn a single sword technique. Will you teach him?" Laughter rippled through the dojo. A peasant had no place here. Teaching him would cheapen the blade, insult tradition, and stain Dai's reputation. Dai felt the familiar pressure of expectation tighten around him. Then he remembered his father's words, long buried but not forgotten: respect is not granted by rank, but by existence. Dai bowed to the peasant as deeply as he would to a lord. The laughter died instantly. "I will teach you," he said. Whispers followed him like shadows. Some called him foolish, others disgraceful. Yet Dai knelt beside the man and taught him patiently, correcting his grip, steadying his stance, never once condescending. The lesson was simple, defensive, meant to protect rather than dominate. When it ended, the peasant bowed low, eyes wet with gratitude. "You have your father's heart," he said quietly. Kenshin watched from the edge of the yard. "This is respect," he said later. "Not humiliation or indulgence, but dignity offered without demand." The fourth virtue awakens. Weeks passed, and the tests sharpened. One evening, Dai was summoned by his uncle to discuss the clan's readiness. The question was casual, almost polite. If conflict came, his uncle asked, would we stand firm? Dai knew the truth immediately, and it tasted bitter. Training had grown lax. Equipment was worn. Strategy rested on old victories rather than present discipline. Speaking honestly would wound pride and strain loyalty. Silence would preserve harmony. Kenshin's gaze was steady, waiting. Dai took a breath that felt heavier than armor. "Uncle," he said, "I must speak truth. We are not prepared. Peace has made us careless. The room fell silent. The words hung dangerously in the air. Dai felt the weight of consequence press against his chest. His uncle's expression darkened, then softened. Your honesty honors me, he said at last. Better discomfort now than disaster later. Later, Kenshin spoke quietly. This is honesty. Truth spoken not to wound, but to protect. Lies preserve comfort. Truth preserves life. Dai felt the fifth virtue settle into place, heavy and solid. The sixth test came without warning. A rival samurai confronted Dai publicly, his voice sharp with mockery. He called Dai weak, soft, a peasant's friend unworthy of his lineage. Eyes turned expectantly. Everyone waited for steel. Honor, as they understood it, demanded blood. Dai felt the heat rise in his chest, the old instinct to prove himself. Then he remembered the rope on the cliff, the starving boy spared by mercy, the peasant taught with dignity. He looked at the rival calmly and bowed slightly. Your words describe you, not me. The rival sneered. You refuse my challenge. Dai met his gaze evenly. I refuse to let your opinion dictate my actions. My honor is not yours to grant or take. Gasps followed him as he walked away. Some called it cowardice. Others whispered of wisdom. Kenshin spoke later, his voice low but firm. Honor is not defended by reaction. It is maintained by alignment with your code. When insults no longer move you, you become untouchable. Dai felt it then, a quiet strength deeper than pride. 3 virtues had awakened not through triumph, but restraint. The trials were carving something permanent into him, something no blade could cut away. The 6th month arrived with winter's edge, sharp and unforgiving. Frost crept across the estate each morning, and the training yard grew silent under pale skies. Kenshin increased the physical demands, but the true weight of the lessons shifted inward. A warrior who conquers others but not himself is still defeated, he said as they stood facing the cold wind. Dai had learned discipline, compassion, respect, honesty, and restraint, but now came the most difficult test of all, mastery of the mind. Kenshin led Dai into the mountains before dawn, far from the safety of walls and routine. They climbed until the estate disappeared beneath clouds. At a narrow ledge overlooking a frozen valley, Kenshin stopped. You will remain here for 3 days, he said, handing Dai a small bundle. Inside were rice, water, and a thin blanket. No sword. No fire. You will not fight hunger, cold, or fear. You will observe them. Dai's throat tightened. This was not training of muscle or technique. This was exposure, raw and unguarded. Yet he bowed and accepted. The first night was agony. Wind howled through the rocks, biting through cloth and skin. Dai's body shivered uncontrollably, his thoughts racing toward regret. Why had he agreed? What purpose did suffering serve without action? Memories surfaced uninvited, his father's fall, the weight of expectation, the fear of never being enough. Each thought sharpened the cold. Kenshin's voice echoed in his mind, observe, do not fight. Dai focused on his breath, slow and deliberate. He named each sensation without judgment. Cold. Hunger. Fear. Slowly, the storm inside him quieted. By the second day, hunger gnawed at him like an animal. His body demanded action, demanded relief. Yet Dai remained still, watching the craving rise and fall like a wave. He realized then that desire lost power when not obeyed. The mind, once believed to be a master, revealed itself as a servant that could be trained. In the silence, clarity emerged. He saw how impatience had driven past mistakes, how anger had clouded judgment, how fear had disguised itself as urgency. None of these forces controlled him unless he allowed them to. On the 3rd day, Kenshin returned. Dai rose slowly, weak but steady. Kenshin studied him carefully. What did you learn? He asked. Dai answered without hesitation. That discomfort is not an enemy. It is a teacher. And fear is only dangerous when it speaks unchecked. Kenshin nodded. This is self-mastery. The sixth virtue. When you command your mind, no battlefield can break you. Back at the estate, word spread of Dai's endurance. Admiration followed, but Dai felt no pride. Pride, he now understood, was another impulse demanding obedience. The next test arrived soon after, subtle and psychological. A messenger brought news of a neighboring province preparing for conflict. Fear rippled through the ranks. Rumors multiplied, exaggerated by anxiety. Dai watched panic spread faster than truth. Kenshin said nothing, waiting. Dai stepped forward and addressed the younger warriors calmly, separating fact from speculation, grounding emotion in clarity. The tension eased. Kenshin spoke afterward. Leadership begins with emotional control. Panic is contagious, but so is calm. The final lesson of the season came during a sparring match. Dai faced a skilled opponent, faster and stronger. Early blows landed hard. Pain flared. Old instincts urged him to rush, to overwhelm. Instead, Dai slowed his breath, observed his reactions, and adjusted. He stopped chasing victory and focused on presence. The match shifted. His movements became efficient, almost effortless. When the bout ended, neither man claimed dominance, yet everyone felt the difference. Dai had not forced the outcome. He had allowed it. That night, Kenshin spoke one last time before winter fully set in. You now understand the core of the samurai path. Strength without awareness is violence. Awareness without discipline is weakness. When mind and action align, you become unshakable. Dai looked out at the darkened yard, feeling the quiet confidence settle deep within him. The sixth paragraph of his transformation was complete, not written in words, but etched into his awareness. The seventh stage of Dai's journey unfolded not through hardship, but through temptation. By now, his reputation had quietly grown beyond the estate. Visitors arrived, samurai from other clans, messengers from distant provinces, and merchants eager to attach themselves to rising influence. Praise followed him like a shadow. Prodigy. Natural leader. The future of the clan. Each word carried warmth, and with it, danger. Kenshin observed silently as admiration tested Dai more than cold, hunger, or fear ever had. Many fall not from weakness, Kenshin said one evening, but from believing they are strong. Dai felt the pull immediately. Respect from others was intoxicating. He noticed how people deferred to him, how conversations paused when he entered a room. His posture straightened unconsciously. His voice grew firmer. None of it felt wrong at first. Yet Kenshin saw the subtle shift. One morning, he placed Dai before a mirror polished to clarity. Look, he said. Dai saw a confident warrior, composed, capable, admired. Kenshin asked, "Who is this for?" The question struck deeper than any blade. Dai had no answer. The test revealed itself soon after. A delegation from a neighboring lord arrived, offering Dai a position of honor within their ranks. Greater resources. Faster promotion. Public recognition. The offer was flattering, strategic, and completely self-serving. Accepting it would weaken his uncle's clan while elevating his own status. The choice seemed practical. Progress often demands movement. Yet Kenshin asked only one question: does this serve your values, or your image? That night, Dai reflected on everything he had learned. Discipline, compassion, honesty, restraint, self-mastery, all meaningless if sacrificed for applause. He realized ego was not loud or crude. It was polite, reasonable, persuasive. It spoke in the language of opportunity. The next day, Dai declined the offer respectfully. The delegation left unimpressed. Word spread quickly, and with it, confusion. Why refuse advancement? Why remain where growth was slower? Kenshin answered for him. Because integrity is worth more than speed. The final lesson of the 7th stage came in private. Kenshin arranged a mock council meeting, placing Dai among senior warriors. Opinions clashed. Voices rose. Strategies competed. Dai had the clearest plan, the strongest logic. He could dominate the room if he chose. Instead, he listened. He asked questions. He refined others' ideas rather than replacing them. When the meeting ended, the best strategy remained, but it belonged to everyone. Kenshin smiled faintly. Leadership is not being the loudest voice. It is creating clarity without needing credit. As the season turned, Dai felt lighter. The need to prove himself had faded. He no longer measured his worth by reaction or recognition. Confidence remained, but it was quiet, rooted in alignment rather than approval. Kenshin spoke one final time before withdrawing from daily guidance. The 7th virtue is humility. Not self-doubt, but self-absence. When ego no longer demands attention, purpose becomes effortless. Dai stood alone in the training yard that evening, watching the sun sink behind the hills. He understood now why so few truly mastered the samurai path. It required not just strength and discipline, but the willingness to disappear behind one's principles. The 7th lesson did not make him greater, it made him clear. The 8th phase did not arrive with ceremony or warning. It came quietly, disguised as peace. After months of trials, resistance, and inner sharpening, Dai found himself in a place that felt unfamiliar, not struggle, but stillness. Kenshin explained that this was the most dangerous moment of all. When the storm ends, he said, men believe the war is over. That is when weakness returns. The final virtue was not about action. It was about restraint. Dai was sent away from the dojo, away from guidance, away from eyes that watched his conduct. No tests. No instructions. No supervision. Kenshin vanished without explanation. Days passed, then weeks. Dai lived among ordinary people, farmers, craftsmen, widows, children. No one knew his name. No one cared about his skill. At first, this anonymity felt freeing. Then it felt uncomfortable. Without challenge, without recognition, his mind searched for conflict. Ego whispered. Restlessness grew. Opportunities appeared, subtle but sharp. A dispute between villagers tempted him to intervene with authority. A dishonest trader invited him into profit through silence. A drunk man insulted him publicly, daring him to respond. Each moment carried an invitation to act, to assert, to dominate. And each time, Dai felt the familiar surge, the desire to prove, to correct, to control. This was the true battlefield. No enemy. No audience. Only choice. He remembered Kenshin's words, self-control is not suppression, it is sovereignty. Power that reacts is not power. Strength that must announce itself is already compromised. Dai began to pause. To breathe. To let moments pass without imprinting himself upon them. The insult faded when unanswered. The dishonest trader moved on when ignored. The village dispute resolved itself without his intervention. And in each instance, Dai felt something loosen, an old hunger dissolving. Weeks later, Kenshin returned without announcement. He observed Dai from a distance, watching how he moved through the world unseen. There was no dramatic reunion. No final test revealed. Kenshin simply nodded. You no longer rush to insert yourself into events, he said. That means you are no longer ruled by them. Dai understood. Self-control was not about denying impulse, but about choosing whether it deserved life at all. The 8th virtue completed the circle. Dai no longer needed conflict to feel alive, nor validation to feel whole. His discipline was internal, automatic, unforced. He could act decisively when required and remain still when action would only serve ego. Kenshin spoke softly, almost to himself. This is mastery. When nothing inside you demands reaction, nothing outside you can command you. As Kenshin departed for the final time, Dai stood alone beneath an open sky. He felt no triumph, no climax, no sense of arrival. Only balance. The path had stripped him of illusion, not added identity. The code was no longer something he followed. It was something he inhabited. And with the eighth virtue awakened, Dai understood the truth that few ever reach: weakness is not destroyed by force, but dissolved by awareness. The journey was complete, not because it ended, but because it no longer needed to be fought. Time moved forward without ceremony, and with it came a quiet transformation that others noticed before Dai did. Seasons changed, villages shifted, conflicts rose and fell, yet Dai remained unchanged at the core. He was no longer defined by reaction or resistance, but by presence. When people spoke to him, they felt heard. When they challenged him, they felt disarmed. When they observed him from afar, they sensed something solid, something settled. He did not announce strength. He embodied it. Young warriors began to seek him out, not because of stories of victory, but because of stories of composure. They said he could walk into chaos and somehow reduce it. That arguments lost heat in his presence. That fear softened when he spoke. Dai did not correct these stories or encourage them. He understood now that influence born from restraint travels farther than influence born from force. Kenshin's final lesson echoed constantly: what you stabilize within yourself, you stabilize in the world. One evening, a young man approached Dai by the training yard, carrying a sword polished but unused. His stance was confident, his technique impressive, yet his eyes betrayed unrest. He spoke of ambition, of proving himself, of becoming feared and respected. Dai listened without interruption. He saw his former self standing there, skilled, driven, hollow. When the young man finished, Dai did not offer instruction. He asked one question: who are you when no one is watching? The young man had no answer. Dai explained that mastery of skill without mastery of self only sharpens weakness. That strength fueled by ego eventually collapses under pressure. That the world does not break men by force alone, but by tempting them to abandon their principles one small compromise at a time. The young man expected techniques. What he received instead was silence, then responsibility. If you wish to train, Dai said, you will begin not with the sword, but with your choices. As months passed, Dai found himself guiding others without declaring himself a teacher. He corrected less and observed more. He tested character through circumstance, not drills. Some left quickly, frustrated by the absence of spectacle. Others stayed, drawn by something they could not name. These were the ones who sensed that the path was not about adding power, but removing dependency, on approval, on dominance, on outcome. Dai understood now why Bushido endured beyond eras, beyond battlefields. It was not a system designed for war, but for life under pressure. For moments when fear whispers, when ego demands, when compromise seems convenient. The code did not promise victory. It promised integrity. And integrity, once forged, could not be negotiated away. As night settled and lanterns dimmed, Dai sat alone, unmoving, aware of breath and silence. He felt no need to measure progress or legacy. The code lived on, not through proclamation, but through example. And in that stillness, one truth became clear: the final transformation of the warrior is not becoming feared, admired, or remembered, but becoming so grounded that the world can no longer pull you out of yourself. Years later, when stories of Dai traveled beyond provinces and borders, they no longer spoke of a man at all, but of a presence. People said weakness could not survive near him, not because he confronted it, but because it found nothing to attach to. Dai had become still in a world addicted to noise, principled in an age of convenience, disciplined where others sought excuses. The forbidden Bushido method had done its work, not by adding something extraordinary, but by removing everything false. He understood then that weakness was never an enemy to be fought. It was a signal, a fracture created when desire outruns discipline and fear outruns truth. Bushido did not eliminate weakness by force. It eliminated it by leaving no room for it to exist. Each virtue acted like a tightening of structure, closing the gaps where doubt, arrogance, and impulse once leaked in. Rectitude aligned choice. Courage dissolved hesitation. Compassion prevented cruelty. Respect removed superiority. Honesty erased self-deception. Honor stabilized identity. Loyalty anchored purpose. Self-control ruled them all. Dai no longer measured life in success or failure. He measured it in alignment. When actions matched values, there was peace. When they did not, correction followed immediately. This was the secret never written in manuals and never spoken loudly. Bushido works only when lived continuously, when every small decision becomes a reinforcement of character. Not heroic moments, but ordinary ones, how you speak when tired, how you choose when unobserved, how you respond when provoked. The world continued to test him, as it tests all men. Loss arrived. Temptation appeared. Injustice surfaced. Yet nothing shook him at the root. He no longer resisted the storm, he had become grounded beneath it. People mistook this for emotional coldness, but it was clarity. Dai felt deeply, but he was not ruled by feeling. He acted decisively, but never impulsively. This balance was the final victory, the one no opponent could challenge. As age crept quietly into his movements, Dai's presence grew heavier, not weaker. Students bowed not out of fear, but out of recognition. They sensed that he carried something ancient yet urgently relevant. He never claimed ownership of the code. He reminded them that Bushido does not belong to Japan, to samurai, or to history. It belongs to anyone willing to choose discipline over comfort, integrity over convenience, mastery over impulse. When Dai finally laid his sword down for the last time, there was no ceremony. No declaration. Only continuity. The code had already moved forward through those who lived it. Weakness had been eliminated not from the world, but from the man himself, and that was enough. Because a man who cannot be internally compromised cannot be externally broken. This was the forbidden truth of Bushido, and this was why it endured. Not as legend, not as philosophy, but as an unbreakable way of being.